Good morning and welcome to Many Paths, Many Visions, brought to you by the Labyrinth Society and with your host, Christiana Brinton. Today I have as my guest Rayne, an earth shaman who travels the world re-energizing and balancing sacred sites, including labyrinth sites, using techniques based on his 40 plus years of study with masters and teachers of many disciplines. If you are joining us on this GoToMeeting session, please mute your sound by clicking on the microphone icon in the upper left of the GoToMeeting control panel that will appear on your computer screen once you log in. If you call in by phone, of course, you will not see this. You can unmute yourselves and ask questions during the Q&A session at the end of the interview. It will be the last 15 minutes or so, and depend on how many people are actually on. You can find the GoToMeeting invitation posted on the Labyrinth Society Facebook page, the Facebook Global Group, and on the website under resources/media/Many Paths, Many Visions, MPMV. So this episode is titled Labyrinth Metaphysics, and this discussion will touch upon the energetic qualities and properties inherent in this archetypal form, an archetypal form of the labyrinth. And it doesn't matter what the design is, no matter what the design, and how humans can most effectively interact with labyrinths for the highest good. So greetings, Calen. Welcome to Many Paths, Many Visions. Thank you for joining me today.
Good morning, Christiana. Namaste to everyone that's listening today or listening in the future.
Yes, thank you. So it is such a pleasure to have you on Many Paths, Many Visions, Calen. I attended both your 2015 Waycross workshop and last year's workshop in Woodstock, Illinois, and both helped me to better understand labyrinths and their uses at a much deeper level. So can you please share, first of all, for listeners who don't know who you are, a brief synopsis of your path to becoming an earth shaman?
Yes, I started out dowsing when I was 5 years old in Kentucky. I grew up in Kentucky. So my father and my his six brothers and my grandfather were all in the Masonic Lodge, and my grandmother and my mother and the 5 aunts were all in the Eastern Star. So there was all this stuff swirling around as a child. And because we lived in Kentucky, I was in the woods a lot and in the forest a lot. And then there was a lot of fishing going on. So I was out on lakes and streams and rivers a lot. And I spent a considerable amount of time in caves as a child because I was either in Kentucky or we were a short ride away when we moved. So we would go back there visiting. So I spent a lot of times in caves. So I was down in the earth a lot. And I think that probably had something to do with it. And then from there, I became a nature photographer later, so I was out a lot. In the 1976, I hadn't studied much about any kind of mysticism or anything, but I'd spent a year as a house parent at the Jewish Home for the Aged in San Francisco with 20 Holocaust survivors with the tattoos. And I spent a year, 24-hour day live-in, and 2 of the gentlemen were Kabbalah guys. So I studied the Kabbalah with them because that's what they did. So from that, I got interested in Jewish mysticism and then ended up with at Naropa, which got me to Nepal for a semester abroad to study with all of the Himalayan shamans, and was introduced to the Kalavankana meditation. And then from there, went on to Egyptian biogeometry and Druid geomancy and Ray Moody with the Psychomontium and Robert Lawler and Dominique Suzani and just, Lauren, Robert Fair, and just kept piling up other weird certifications, 4 Reiki lineages as a master level. So once I got into the mysticism part from the Kabbalah, I just kept going for those type of teachings.
And it would, well, I could ask a lot of questions about your experiences in those caves because I've had also been, I'm sure people who have been in caves and have done sacred work in caves know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But I'm going to try to stick to what we were planning on talking about here, because I could probably do a couple of these podcasts with you easily. So let's first establish, getting to where labyrinths have come into your um, methodology. Let's first establish the idea that labyrinths can connect with the field of consciousness of the land. So this is Gaia, the sentient being that is this planet, which is my understanding, through genesis points. So can you please explain this concept?
Um, to me, at one point when the continents were all connected, I think Pangea was the term. There would have had to have been an information spot somewhere in that realm would have been a place where you could access information. The continents split up into 7 continents, and there would have had to have been some sort of information link maintained. And in the case of the United States, eventually, we got states, and then we got counties, and then we got municipalities, and then we got subdivisions, and then we had homes that were built on certain lots. So to me, it works like the heart, where everything is connected back to the original source. So it would be like arteries connecting back to the heart. When you drop a labyrinth on the ground, you're dropping it on the ground, and it has to connect to some sort of information field. So my theory is that when the labyrinth is placed on the ground, it generates its own genesis point, and somewhere on that labyrinth is a spot that is connected to that original energy portal. And that's so even if it's a portable labyrinth, as soon as you drop it down, it has to connect to something in order to birth itself.
And explain genesis points?
The genesis point is just a term that I call, when I go to a property for energetic work, I need to establish some line of communication with a property. So I usually start out with a plot or a plat map, depending on what you want to call it. And I just douse it with my rods and figure out where that spot is that the communication is coming into the property. And then I stand on that spot and access the feed. And then have go into communication with the property to understand what it needs and what energetic tweaks it might need in order to reach its full potential.
Mm. And what? So in terms of a labyrinth, so labyrinths have genesis points too.
Yeah, when the labyrinth goes down, it would have to establish a connection to a larger information field. And it needs to participate in its own birthing in a sense, and it has to return to a connection with some energy field and some source of information. So I believe that when you walk up to a labyrinth, you can figure out where that point is on the labyrinth. And if you were wanting to do any tweak to it, or if you wanted to inform the labyrinth as for the intention of it, or if you wanted to make any adjustments on the frequency or the vibration or the resonance of the labyrinth, that is the spot that you would go to and you would do your work.
Okay. So in your first workshop, Discovering the Genesis Point, you talked about energetic sweet spots on the labyrinth, and that the energy of the group walking and what the group was in need of energetically was affected by these sweet spots and the genesis point. So can you speak further about this whole idea of us being affected by and affecting, and this whole idea of sweet spots?
In my training in the Himalayas, it was believed that a labyrinth was placed on the ground for medical intuitive readings, or medical dowsing, as I call it, which I do. If I'm working with a client, I usually have them lie down with their head on a classical labyrinth pattern, like what I call the brain map. And when you first put a labyrinth down, there are spots on the labyrinth when I walk it that need a little bit of a tweak energetically. So in the old days, if someone was on it for a medical reading, the healer would sit outside, watch the labyrinth. As the person walked it going in, there would be a tone or a vibration or a resonance that was off. and they would be able to determine that a certain spot on the labyrinth, and in the case of Dominic Susani, he has a classical labyrinth that has the body map on it. They would determine what the anomaly was, and then they would go in and tweak that spot so that when the person walked back out, it would adjust either the vibration or the resonance, and in theory heal the anomaly. So it's my belief that when you walk a labyrinth, there are places that you would walk in a labyrinth that you would feel you might feel a little off when you stepped on a certain spot. And in theory, if the labyrinth will recognize that if it's set up right, and as you walk back out of the labyrinth, it will have a tweak there for you that will adjust whatever the resonance interruption was.
And so when you're talking about
it's a working theory.
Yeah. So when you're talking about tweaking, is this like using acupuncture needles, like to the right is more energy, to the left, expansion and contraction, yin and yang, like more.
You can visualize a labyrinth as when you drop a labyrinth on a certain piece of property, that you're doing sort of earth acupuncture. It's the same thing when crop circles appear. In my theory, is that those things appear for a reason, and I believe that some labyrinths are invited to be where they are. The labyrinth ended up in the Chartres Cathedral, on Grace Cathedral. There are different places where labyrinths end up, and I believe at some point the land invited them there for whatever reason. So that's.
So this is the tweaking, and so you can tweak.
Yeah.
So you're tweaking. You're doing earth acupuncture for the labyrinth itself, but when someone is walking it and needs medically tweaking, you can now to explain the body map that you're talking about, because you said he has a labyrinth with the body map already on it.
Yeah, it was a classical labyrinth, and it has French on it. But there are certain colors, and one was for the liver, one was for the kidney, one was for the heart, one was for the stomach, and they correlated to certain spots on the labyrinth, which gets back to what I learned in the Himalayas. And when I trained with Dominic Susani, and it was like 11 days in Boulder, we spent a lot of time one-on-one standing on the hillside outside of Boulder while everybody else was doing sort of the workshop stuff, exchanging my notes from the Himalayas and his note from the Druid tradition on how you could use the labyrinth for those type of activities. Set it up ahead of time so that the labyrinth communicates with the earth and communicates with the individual and makes adjustments for you as you're walking. Based on when you may take that first step into the labyrinth, normally you will walk in with an intention, and as soon as you step onto that field, the labyrinth is now engaged with you, and in theory should support you on that journey based on your intention as you walked in. And it can make adjustments as you're going.
Is there any place that we could see this body map that's superimposed on a classical?
I have one.
You do.
I have one. I can dig it out and get it to you.
That'd be awesome. Well, I would love to share it with TLS and have it. So that's up to you if you're willing to share it with.
Yeah, Dominique's I'm okay with. My one from the Himalayas, that's sort of proprietary.
Okay, right, totally.
So that one I can't show.
Okay. So, okay, send it to me, and I will make sure that we get this up on the website. Okay. Because I think people would be very interested in seeing this and having this as a useful tool, especially those of us who really get into this kind of stuff and understand what the dowsing is all about and how this affects. So getting back to, so you have this map superimposed on the labyrinth design, and so you're saying that even if multiple people, like 20 people or 25 people, are on a labyrinth, the labyrinth is still able to help people, depending on where they're walking and what their physical situation is, make balance.
One of Lawler's, when I trained with Lawler, one of his ideas was that whether we realize it or not, all beings enter existence by means of that which perceives them. So my theory would be that when it doesn't matter if you have 50 people stepping into the labyrinth, as each person steps in there, all beings entering the labyrinth come into existence by means of that which perceives them. So at that moment, the labyrinth makes an individual connection with that particular person on their resonance and their frequency, and enters into a communication with them that is a private communication with them, not necessarily based on the other people on the labyrinth, unless for some reason somebody else on the labyrinth has something that can inform that communication and make it inform it in a positive way.
So this is here we're talking about when you step into, so here's this threshold idea, this idea of this liminal space that you now are entering. When you step into a labyrinth, what you're saying is you are entering a space that is outside, that is transpersonal, that's outside the three dimensions of, or even the two-dimensional, that walking this labyrinth that is basically what looks like two-dimensional. But what you're saying is the labyrinth is in effect a transpersonal and design and archetypal form energy grid, and that you are stepping into this energy grid, and therefore will experience unconsciously or subconsciously or changes in your physical body, physical, mental, and emotional bodies, I would imagine.
Yes, think of it as two worlds. You have call one unmanifest and one manifest, call one non-physical and one physical. Mm-hmm. And between the two worlds would need to be a boundary of some sort through which the communication takes place. And my theory is that the labyrinth is one of those things that allows the information to flow through that boundary. Lawler believed that was based on irrational numbers. My research is focused on the manipulation of irrational frequencies based on tone and ritual objects that I believe exist in this boundary, and that you can manipulate the boundary in a sense, or set up the labyrinth field in a way that communication becomes more readily available to people.
Oh, this is juicy. Okay. All right. So I'm going to stick to, lots of questions, but so in your last year's lecture, because I want to talk to you about these fields, in the labyrinths and the geometry of memory, that was the name of your lecture. You talked about Minkowski spacetime and ERTAS, ERTAS, which is Extended Reticular Thalamic Activating System. So can you please explain these two ideas in relationship to labyrinths and labyrinth use?
Yeah, I did. Some people speak of the Akashic field. Some people talk about universal consciousness. And my term for it is wisdom tabernacle. In theory, if the universe is a hologram, the hologram exists on the boundary edge of a black hole at the edge of the universe in what's called the Schwarzschild metric. And there's a term, there's something there called Flam's paraboloid, FLAMM. So if you take a paraboloid, you basically have a cone. And to me, that cone is coming out of the black hole. It's got all the information on the boundary edge from the beginning to the end of time, and it's aimed out into the universe. So if you put a labyrinth on the ground and you put multiple points around the labyrinth and you connect them to the center of the earth, it resembles what some people would call a gravity well paraboloid. But basically, you've put up another one of those megaphones or another one of those cones. And my theory is that those two are connected, that the amplification from the labyrinth goes out to the Flam's paraboloid, and in between there then is a channel of communication of all of the information from the beginning to the end of time. That's set there. ERTAS, the extended reticular thalamic, is that a person has a memory or an experience, and in the brain, the system goes back to see if this is a memory that's ever been had before. And if it's not a memory that's ever been had before, it establishes a new memory. it possibly, if this is the 5th time you've walked a particular labyrinth, then you're building on 4 memories of 4 different times that you've walked that labyrinth. So then it goes back and says, do I need to make any adjustments on the memory field that was developed the first 4 times there? Did I have a new experience this time that I need to add to that database? And you're basically building the database with ERTAS. So my assumption is that when you step into a labyrinth, you're in that, what I call the wisdom tabernacle, and you're able to go back and forth in that tube and access all of the information from the beginning to the end of time, which thus enables you to bring memories back from the future. Because a lot of people walk into a labyrinth with the intention of, I want to make changes in my life. And I'm going in here with the intention that 5 years from now, such and such a thing will manifest in my life. So they're basically going into the future and picking up, in my estimation, a memory of something that they want to be 5 years in the future, and possibly bringing back a diagram or a pathway to reach that goal. And Minkowski space-time is just, it's a different space-time. It's the one that has cones, with the past and the future cones coming together in the present time. So I use Minkowski space-time instead of Newtonian space-time. I use a Lorentzian manifold instead of a Riemannian manifold when I'm establishing a labyrinth field. And I typically work with both Lucas and Fibonacci frequencies, because I think they have two different sets of information that work better with the 2 different space-times and the 2 different manifolds, which is a lot to digest.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. Good. Yes. Again, juicy. And I'm trying to write down all these little. So talk about these manifolds. What are the difference between them, and why do you work with one, the Lorentzian, rather than the?
It works in what I call the spiritual realm, as opposed to the what I would call the earthly realm, which is more of a Riemannian, or more of the Riemannian.
Riemannian.
Riemannian, yeah.
Okay.
So I'm trying to deal with something that's dealing more with the spiritual realm. Plus, in a 4-dimensional Lorentzian manifold, you're actually modeling space-time differently. And then you end up with the Wheeler-DeWitt equation, which, if calculation, you can actually.
Calen, we can't hear you. Calen, something happened when you moved. Are you there? Calen?
Hello?
Calen, can you?
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
So
which part did I fall off of?
I don't know. You got caught up in that Lorentzian manifold thing. There you go.
It's like a 4-dimensional manifold that deals a lot with space-time. But at some point, the Wheeler-DeWitt, I work a lot with the Wheeler-DeWitt equation, which means you can drop time out of the equation. And that allows for this movement, in my estimation, across the tube, in order to get the information from the past to the future.
Okay, so time as a linear construct you're talking about.
Yeah, in Newtonian space-time, it's basically today's Tuesday, tomorrow will be Wednesday. If you can get into Minkowski space-time, then you're, all bets are off, and you can move. You have free movement. I had one person when I was doing a Kalabandhana meditation, and I had her head was on a classical labyrinth, and she had cancer and was trying to get into the future to see the light, because she knew she was going to pass away. And the table was surrounded by all of her friends who were hanging on for dear life. And she sat up and said, I couldn't get to the future. But what I did was I went 4 billion years back in time until I was a speck of dust and had my first moment of consciousness, which opened up all kinds of avenues for me. I'm thinking, okay, this person just, in theory, went 4 billion years back to the first moment of consciousness. So that opened up the whole thing going backwards. There are people that have the near-death experiences, and they talk about going into the light and going into the future. But that was the first time someone had come out of the meditation and said that they had traveled that far in the past.
And did they feel like this helped them with their physical well-being?
She said, then I know it's going to be okay.
Ah,
Because if I could get back 4 billion years and I was conscious then, and I realize now that I was conscious 4 billion years ago, then why wouldn't I be conscious 4 billion years in the future?
ah.
So even though she couldn't go into the light because of her friends hanging on, she was fine then because she knew that there had to be some, in her mind, there had to be some, extended warranty
I
going
got it.
forward.
Wow. Okay. So getting back to the Ertos thing. So this is not just getting memories from your. So Ertos is only related to um, um, accessing memories in this lifetime. And then when you use it in conjunction with Minkowski space-time, then you're going backwards and forwards or into cones. Then you're accessing these cones, past and future cones.
Yeah, I'm just thinking when I look at the two of them, then I'm getting into the tube, and
Too.
any memories I pull back on a particular labyrinth walk, I'm either coming up with an entirely new one, or I'm able to draw on memories from both the past and the future, which affects how I change things now.
Okay. Okay, so all right, I have one more question, and then I want to sort of get down to some specifics about what this actually means. Okay, but so in your notes from your lecture, you maintain that labyrinths are in a Rigpa state. I am saying that, I hope, the right way, which is
Yes.
it's a Buddhist term meaning spontaneous presence, being primordial, existent, without an origin, self-existent. That's Wikipedia. That's my Wikipedia for today.
Yeah.
And so can you explain this further? So we
Yeah. In
understand.
Buddhist terminology, it's known as non-conceptual, thought-free, original wakefulness. So in relation to labyrinths, I believe that before you step into that labyrinth, the labyrinth it's been prepared, it's ready to birth whatever comes into it. But at that point, it's in a state of non-conceptual, thought-free, original wakefulness in anticipation of the people stepping into its field. It has, at this point, it doesn't have a conception of what those people are going to want necessarily. It's not thinking about what they might want because that could change as soon as they enter the field. And it's just an original wakefulness state where it's connected to the source. I know I was speaking in Shard about this, and I said that if you think about reincarnation, that some people think that when the Dalai Lama was chosen, they would put objects in front of him, and based on him being able to choose objects from a previous Dalai Lama, that's how they knew it was the Dalai Lama. My thoughts after studying with all of the Rinpoches and everyone I studied with in Nepal was it's possible that they're looking for an individual who is already in a state of Rigpa, the non-conceptual, thought-free original wakefulness, and because they're in that original state, they just naturally are able to go to those particular objects. So it because they're just inherent in their nature, in sort of call it the Dalai Lama archetype. So they were looking for someone that was in that state, because that's what would allow them to do that. And when I studied over there, when you went into the courtyards at the monasteries, the kids would be playing soccer, and all the little kids would be running around kind of in their little outfits, and they were kicking the ball and everything. And then the Rinpoche, the baby Rinpoche, as I called him, who was like 5-6 years old, it had a different color robe. And he would kick the ball, and he would walk over and stand in front of you and just have this look in his eyes that you knew that he knew everything there was about everything that ever existed. And he would just look at you and go, yes, I know everything and you don't. And then he would go back to play soccer. So I thought they were the little baby Rinpoches were really cool.
Yeah, yeah, that must have been a hoot to be among them. Wow. No wonder. Yes, no wonder there's that whole guardianship and the whole issue with China. But anyway, that's a whole nother thing. Um, um, so when you are so that is not necessarily the case with every labyrinth, but we'll talk about this later about you waking them up again, because some labyrinths have gone to sleep, some be out of for whatever reason, and they're not awake. They're not necessarily they're sleeping.
In anticipation of their next encounter with humans.
Okay. And is it okay? So I'm going to go back to this Minkowski statement. So how can humans tune a labyrinth's ecofields to Minkowski spacetime to access its morphogenic memory field matrix, to access the cones? How do we do that? Or is it already done because they're in the Rigpa state?
Well, no, I believe the system's already set there. So I think all someone would really need to do is just, whoever the facilitator is just set the intention. My intention for this labyrinth walk is that the individuals who step into this labyrinth will have access to all of the information they need in the memory field matrix, in the universal consciousness or whatever, to further their journey on their path. Sometimes when I say namaste, I add yahadi, which is a Sufi term, which means may your journey or your spiritual journey take you to the place you need to be when you need to be there. So it's sort of like you've been brought apparently to a place where you needed to walk a labyrinth when you needed to be there, and it's for the facilitator to say, I want this to be a walk where people have access to everything they need where they are right now on their journey, to facilitate them having a good walking experience, but also a transformative experience.
Okay. So this is really like this is so setting one's intention is not a frivolous thing. It is really a very thoughtful action to take, because you are then, waking the labyrinth up, tuning into these fields, and so this is not something that you do just off the cuff. To me, it's a sacred act that you're performing, because you're connecting the people who are walking and all those beings who are accompanying them, who are not in their physical bodies, with this labyrinth, as a healing tool, as a tool for accessing these memories.
Yes, my theory is that the setting up the intention, and when I roll a labyrinth out or I walk up to a labyrinth, I try to find the genesis point. I enter into a communication with it. I say, is there anything you need for the experience that we're about to have, or for the people that are about to walk this, based on your analysis of the situation? This is in theory, the intention for the walk had a theme. This is what the theme was. There are a group of individuals, in hospice that are getting ready to walk this labyrinth. Are there any tools or information or frequencies or vibrations that would be helpful to you for these people that are getting ready to walk? And if you can enter into a communication with the labyrinth will ask for things. It may want candles. It may not want candles. It may want to, in my case, because I have the ritual objects and everything, they know, in theory, the labyrinth knows what I have available and what I can put in it. And the labyrinth, if you're in communication with the labyrinth, then it would probably know everything that you have available to you, and should be able to tell you what it needs.
So when you, all right, okay, all right, when you're, I'm going to ask this right now. So when you are doing your labyrinth walks or workshops or whatever, how much time do you give yourself prior to the start of the event to interact with the labyrinth?
if it's a permanent labyrinth, I will go out on my own. When we go to Chart, our class starts on Sunday evening. Our labyrinth walk is Wednesday, so in July. So I always get there on Friday because we have a staff meeting on Saturday, and Friday the labyrinth is open. So I go walk it on Friday just to figure out what's been going on with it since the previous year, and then I sat there at some point on Saturday night or Saturday sometime. I go down and sit for a couple hours next to it and try to analyze it energetically to figure out what's going on. And then on Wednesday evening then, and by then I know what I'm doing, on Wednesday evening I solo walk it, because I help get the chairs off, and then I walk it by myself with my singing bowl, and I've already introduced everything I needed as far as a download in my singing bowl, the 600-year-old bowl, and I walk the labyrinth fairly quickly and sound the bowl all the way across and tweak all of the spots that have, in my estimation, the labyrinth is asked to be tweaked based on, this is who we have coming this year. We have 71 people. This is what I know about them. So I have a conversation saying, this is the group of people that are going to be here on Wednesday night. This is everything we're bringing to the table. What information do you want? And then I download it when I do that solo walk on Wednesday evening. And then I sit over on the other side of the cathedral, up on the south side on the Genesis point of the cathedral, and I monitor the labyrinth walk on one that I have on my lap, and I monitor it energetically to see what's going on. And then on occasion I go down, if need be, and do a small tweak. Last year we had a person with terminal cancer, and I had a little bump on my pendulum, and I went down, and somehow it cleared off three quadrants of the labyrinth was cleared off, and in the upper right corner he had just entered it, and he was in it all by himself. And I stood there, and everybody sort of changed their paces or something, and he was able to walk the entire third quadrant alone. And as soon as he left that quadrant, then I headed back up to the other end, and he's still now receiving treatment. And so it wasn't as terminal as they thought. But he was carrying one of my purbas as he walked it, one of my Himalayan purbas. It's a Tibetan healing purba, so he had that inside his jacket pocket as he walked.
Wow. Okay, so you're off the labyrinth, off of the where the Genesis point of the cathedral is, with a finger labyrinth on your lap.
Yep.
With a pendulum. Got it.
Yes, and the idea is it's just the pendulum should just stay in the center of the labyrinth, and at some point during that evening, the pendulum spun a couple or three turns and then aimed at the third quadrant. The upper right quadrant. So I knew that when I went down there, that's where something was going on that I needed to walk down to.
And what does that third quadrant? What does the map look like in that third quadrant? Is that?
I don't have that labyrinth in front of me, so
okay.
Once I pull it out, I'll know.
Just was wondering.
In my case, my assumption was that was the reason I ended up down there. But I lay other things on the labyrinth too. See, I lay down the Kabbalah Tree of Life pattern. So that's another pattern that I have placed on the labyrinth. Plus, because my wife's one of the top feng shui masters in the world, I have a bagua laying on it. So that upper template there is relationships. So that particular quadrant has relationships. The bottom right has helpful people. There's a wealth corner there. Creativity, ancestors, wisdom. So that's another grid that needs to be laid on top of a labyrinth, so you have an idea of what, at least in Bagua terms, what's going on in each of the areas of the labyrinth as you walk it.
That's very interesting to me, Calen, because what they say about cancer, that it is a imbalance of repression, and which is very often emotional. And where do you get most of your repression from? In your relationships with people.
Relationships, yes.
Yeah.
So the feng shui, a course at some point on the feng shui of the labyrinth pattern might be of interest to someone.
Yes. Absolutely, absolutely. So let's go. So I'm David Gallagher is, and I'm naming you David because I see your name, and I know he wants to ask you some questions. So I want to get to the rest of my questions. So you write that linking a labyrinth energetically to a more nuanced holographic information field, stretching from beginning to end of time, might enable someone to navigate infinite memory matrices and access memories from what some refer to as universal conscious, which is the Akashic records, or and so how might navigating? So you gave us an example of this woman who went back in time. So so if we're walking though and navigating this memory matrix and accessing these memories that are found there, what might be the experience of someone walking? Will they what have been some of the experience for people that you've found that people have told you?
Yeah, I explained part of that in my idea of this tube. Uh, one of our students in Chart one year um, walked out of the labyrinth and said, "I just, I'm fairly comfortable with my life here. I never wanted children. I always told people I never wanted children. And as I walked into the labyrinth, I was drawn into this womb, and I could see myself. I could see my daughter and what she was going to bring to the world. So I'm going to go home and have a child."
Wow.
Which was that one was fairly interesting.
Yeah.
And then someone came off and said that she decided to go back. She decided to go back in time based on her experience. She decided to go back in time and have the conversation with her husband that she would have had at the breakfast table if she had known he was going to get broadsided and killed 5 minutes after he left the house.
uh, wow, that is. And was
But,
she able to do
but
that? She
yeah,
actually was able to do it?
that's what she did when she was in the center of the labyrinth. But she realized that she was walking it because of the way it had been set up, that she had that availability to go back and have that conversation. So when she got to the center of the labyrinth, she had the conversation.
But can these now we always say, though, labyrinth facility always say that the connection can happen at any time at any place in the labyrinth. Do you feel that that's the case, or it's only in the center, or only at the sweet spots?
Oh, now it can happen anywhere on there. There were just particular, in theory, there would be particular spots that you would resonate with more. If I lay a tree of life pattern on there and I lay a bagua on there, someone that's looking for wisdom might have have a little experience over in the wisdom corner, the lower left as you enter. So it would be in that first quadrant of connecting to a wisdom field. And they would, the entire time, if it was a Chart labyrinth, the entire time they would be walking in that quadrant, they might be connecting to some wisdom thing they were looking for. Some people always wait till I get to the center to deal with whatever they're dealing with, because that's where they believe the most energy would be. And then there are specific, the little rosettes in the center. And I find that some of the most powerful spots are the little spaces in between them, between those. So I usually, at least on the Wednesday walk when I'm in Chart, when I'm in the center, when I first get to the center after I do the solo walk, I step on all those different places, and if one of them has a little higher vibration than others, there are several people that I'll tell them that when you get in there, you should go to that spot for a download, because that's what the labyrinth says. Have so and so, stand here. So.
One more question, and then I'm going to open the floor to David if he wants to ask a question. I don't see his mic even highlighted on my panel here, but one more question. So, in your travels, Have you experienced any permanent labyrinths as that were stagnated or were asleep, and were you able to revive them? And if so, what were the consequences?
I don't work on anything where I'm not invited.
Mm-hmm.
So because if someone has designed a labyrinth and they put it on the ground, I don't believe it's my place to go in and say, well, there's something weird about this. I should try to adjust this energy field. I only work on labyrinths when I'm invited to work on them. And I have a conversation with people ahead of time if I'm invited in, and I have my various tools with me, and I just do what I do with the grid that I work with and try to tweak the grid that I'm working with so that it can reach its full potential. And then from that point, whatever anybody else is doing in the future should be able to actualize itself. Because all I'm doing is stabilizing. If the labyrinth hasn't been walked in a long time, it's especially important with portable labyrinths because they end up spending a lot of time under not being used. Because a portable labyrinth gets folded up and then it's kept somewhere for a while, and then then it gets rolled out and used, and then it gets folded back up and put back somewhere. So it's really important with portable labyrinths when people put them down that they try to reestablish that connection of the labyrinth to the earth beneath it, so that it can get back into the information stream and update itself. I call it redoing the hard drive, or just updating the database so it has all the current information, so that when people step into it, everything is available to them.
Okay. And what about ones that you found? If you've just been walking, or you come upon them and they're out in the land somewhere, do you check them out, or do you just leave them be? I mean,
I check them out and then I walk them. I don't check them out. And again, if I'm not invited in by the facility or whoever it is that maintains the labyrinth, I mean, if it's a labyrinth that's just sitting where nobody's walked it for 20 years and it's all grown over and they don't want nobody's even doing anything to it at all, then I might into a conversation and they might just say they're fairly lonely. And could I, do something energetically, because it won't matter because no one's walked me in the last 10 years and I don't know if anybody will ever walk me. They have that sort of attitude. So if I have my tools with me, I'll drop a perb in and either we'll walk it with a singing bowl and download whatever I have, because I have in my singing bowl, I have all the sacred sites I've been to and all the labyrinths I've walked and everything. They're all embedded in my singing bowl, so I can download everything I've got.
Embedded energetically in your singing bowl.
Yeah, but the labyrinth is still connected to the field. It's just not
right.
It's just not being used. For some reason, it got put on the ground, and then nobody ever decided for whatever reason not to use it.
Okay. So, David, if you're on and you want to ask Calen a question or two, please unmute yourself and please join us.
Oh, I'm actually on the telephone because I've got a problem on my computer.
Okay.
Hi. So I'm audible to both of you, yes?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So, well, the topic intrigued me because it included the word metaphysical. And listening through your comments, Calen, quite intriguing. I get the feeling that you're doing authentic science. And in that respect, I come to the labyrinth from the Western philosophical tradition, as opposed to the Eastern, recognizing that there are congruencies, parallels, qualities between the two, but the terminologies are so different between them that it's often very difficult and challenging to integrate to the Eastern and the Western points of view. Now, one of the things that occurred to me in your answering of Christiana's questions is that if I can put the terminology into contemporary cosmology, you see the labyrinth as an event horizon. Would you agree with that?
Yes, in a manner of speaking. It would be the Malakulan tribe studies labyrinths from the time they're small children, because they believe that when a person passes away, they step into a labyrinth, and in order to navigate through the afterlife, they have to walk that labyrinth. So I suppose on the boundary edge of the black hole, on that event horizon, you could see that as a labyrinth.
All right, so that would it make sense to you then that the labyrinth, as we experience it in this embodied experience that we're experiencing, the labyrinth is in some way a preparation?
Yes, for preparation for probably a preparation for everything that comes after that. I mean, in theory, if our intention is that the labyrinth is a transformative experience, so one would hope that someone walks the labyrinth and has some epiphany or some realization of either changes they wanted to make or some better focus on what their path needs to be going forward. So it's, in that case, it would be a preparation for that which follows it.
All right, so from that point of view, do you consider every individual sentient being to be itself a genesis point?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, here's a general background question. What's your thinking regarding where and when the classical labyrinth first manifested itself in human history or experience?
I think most people say 5,000–6,000 years ago. There was some article I read one time that thought it went back to the Ukraine, further back than that.
That's okay.
So the physical manifestation was whatever that time frame was. I guess to me, when I look at the classical labyrinth pattern, I just see a brain. I mean, when I look at it, it looks to me like a brain map. And I guess I would have thought that it was almost pre-existent. When I did my doctoral dissertation, part of it was 11 paintings, which I call the original nested geometries. And I think that it's possible that maybe the classical labyrinth pattern and the brain and everything in some ways were an original nested geometry.
Well, the reason I asked the question is that it appears to me, my understanding, that the origin of the appearance of the labyrinth, and not trying to be too empirical in terms of archaeological verification, but more in the sense of the idea of the labyrinth starting to take an actual manifested form. For example, we have the allusions to the Egyptian labyrinth, which goes back much more deeply into antiquity, that idea, than does, let's say, the examples that we can find in the rock art and caves, and
the meanders that they thought just kept folding over.
Yeah, excellent. So the reason I asked the question is that it appears to me that the labyrinth as a physical symbol and archetype, if you will, is more clearly associated with the Western tradition and more clearly integratable with Greek metaphysics, Hellenistic metaphysics, than it would be with the Eastern. But then you also mentioned that you found the labyrinth in use in the Himalayas in connection with healing. So how far back historically do you think that practice in the Himalayas goes? So
it was a particular walking pattern that they would set up, but depending on the space in the training, depending on the space that they had and the area that they were in, diagram of some sort was put on the ground, and someone would walk it, and the healer would do the diagnosis that way. Now, maybe it was necessarily, in my mind, I used the actual classical labyrinth pattern. In the Himalayas, it would have been whatever diagram that particular healer used in the space that he had available. So that, to me, that went back forever.
All right, so they weren't actually using a classical labyrinth design. It's more the idea of the ambulation that was involved.
Yeah, if I gave that, if that came out, if I said classical labyrinth, I didn't mean that from the Himalayas. It was the walking pattern of having someone walk a diagram of some sort, and the only one I've ever used for it after I trained with that was I've used this brain map, the classical labyrinth. So I've just co-opted it, for lack of a better word, and that's the one that I use.
Okay, so that answered my question. Thank you much. So you referenced, or maybe it was Christiana who used this particular thing, so in my notes I have here labyrinth, birthing connection with source, ? And then in connection with that, there was this idea of the thought-free original wakefulness, which there's probably a Sanskrit word that goes with that. It might actually in the Vedantin be a reference to Brahman, but that struck me as being quite parallel in Platonic philosophy with the idea of the arisal of intellect flowing forth from the good, or the source itself being a thought-free original wakefulness. But that's a whole other deeper question. Now, so we're running out of time here. Another one of my questions here is, why do you think that labyrinths, quote, work, unquote, for some people and not others?
I don't know, did I say they work for some people and not others?
That's my question.
Oh,
all right,
okay.
So let me rephrase. From my 20 years of experience with labyrinths and my own personal experience, some people simply walk the labyrinth, and even when they've been facilitated in the manner that you suggested in terms of the importance of walking intentionally and having an actual conceptually formed idea, or not expectation, but intention for the walk, they will do the walk and nothing happens for them. And so they sort of seem to have they've been conditioned with an expectation, and then they do the walk and the expectation they had was never realized, and they're not exactly left confused necessarily, but more coming after the experience is nothing happened for me, so I don't get it.
And possibly something happened on a more subtle level, maybe a subtle change in their energetic that they didn't pick up on necessarily. It might have something to do with the venue. It might have something to do with what they had for lunch. There are any number of things that people thought that maybe they didn't have anything happen, but then maybe sometime later they might think back on it. Okay,
all right. So my own speculation is that individuals, I'm going to call them souls, that's the terminology that I would use. So a sentient, human conscious sentient entity, that each one of these entities is evolving, and that there comes a genesis point, in my opinion, in that evolution, where that entity is ready for the transition, and all of the experience that has accrued over the millennia of that entity's development or evolution as a genesis point is going to come in contact with the genesis point, and until it's really ready, nothing's going to happen. It's still blocked.
Yeah.
Just my speculation. Yeah. All right, and then a final. We're running out of time here, so one final curiosity here is how do I put this? So do you perceive dowsing as a mode of divination?
Divination? I think that's one of the terms they use for it. For me, it's just math. It just enables me to calculate the math faster. So
if we take number as divine in its source and nature, then divination is going to necessarily implicate number.
Yeah.
All right.
So,
now, then, what do you think about astrology? Do you have any views on astrology and whether there might be some kind of equivalence between astrology and dowsing?
There could be. It's just not a realm I've got into. I know we're doing. This is Astronomica at Chart this year, so we will have the discussion will be in astrology, which it is every 7th year. So I know it's extremely important in a number of people's lives. That's one thing I haven't studied.
Okay.
Of all the weird things I've studied, I just never got around to the astrology part. So,
right.
So I have no opinion one way or the other. I'm guessing astrology is something like dowsing, but they're using a lot. I know they use a lot of math. I've seen some of the charts, and they look fairly mathematical to me.
Yeah, and particularly with reference to quadrature, which then kind of prompted the question in my mind of if we compare the classical labyrinth and the chart or medieval labyrinth. In the classical labyrinth, I think that the quadrature is kind of hidden there, whereas in the chart, it becomes more manifest. And so, or rather than chart, let's just say medieval, to make it more generic, that somehow, which I don't understand, the evolution of the labyrinth idea, it was, the historical record seems to suggest somewhere in the 9th or 10th century, based upon manuscript illuminations. The medieval pattern started to be played with. The illuminators were playing with that geometry, and that you really don't get more manifest quadrature until you get to the medieval pattern, whereas it was more sort of imminently hidden in the classical labyrinth. But in order to explore that further, we need to look together at the geometry of it, because you've got the 4 points in the seed pattern, and they play a role in that. But in any event, a final question for you. What do you think is the I that is conscious?
The I as in EYE or just I?
B, I.
I?
The letter I.
Okay.
Yeah, the pronoun that usually,
okay.
When I refer to myself, I say I am, and then that's an incomplete predicate. So whatever I fill in after the I am,
yes.
I might say I am David, I might say I am a divine being, I might say I am a labyrinth enthusiast, etc., etc. Yeah. What is that I?
What is that I for me, or what is that I in just my speculation is what the I is?
But the I is universally.
Oh, if I was doing the I universally, I would just say I am, and leave it at that. And we're all an aspect of the universal consciousness. It's sort of like everything is breathing with one breath, and we're just that one breath. So it's just an aspect of the one breath.
So the word aspect suggests that there are perhaps innumerable aspects of the one I.
Just the one breath is being taken, or I guess the one, if you want to go back to the Big Bang or whatever you want to call it, there's one breath going on, and we're part of the one breath. Right?
Okay, so that's like the wave in the ocean.
Like the wave in the ocean. Yeah, when I was baptized at a Pentecostal tent revival when I was 5 in Kentucky, and the reason was that I was supposed to become just like Jesus. And the week I was baptized, because it was the week of the baptisms. On the sign out in front of the church, it said Jesus walks on water. And so on the weekend, I was baptized. I was put into the river. And when I went fishing with my dad the next week, I stepped into the river and sunk down, and he dragged me out of the water. And he said, "What are you trying to do?" And I said, "Well, I figured I was like Jesus now, because Jesus could walk on water." So I was just testing. At that point, at the age of 5, I was testing the hypothetical, as I now look back on it, because I was supposedly just like Jesus, and I was not.
Well,
in the sense I couldn't walk on water.
You can take the age as 5, 6, 7. It's kind of like there's this tradition of when does the baby, the child, achieve the age of reason, and so that seems itself to be a kind of threshold point in if you will, the sociology of religion. In Roman Catholicism, 6 or 7 is about the age when you receive your first communion, and then receive the sacrament of confirmation, and that sacrament of confirmation is related to the Pentecostal experience of the descent of the Holy Spirit on the apostles. And so all of that I just take as metaphorical, but that's just my point of view. Anyway, this could go on for a long time.
Give me a call.
This is Christiana. Can I just say, to me, that whole idea of consciousness is about energy and being a part of this wave, but also being a genesis point, having the ability to be endlessly create, because that's what this is. Consciousness is endlessly creative. And so then we have the ability as humans, because consciousness awakes in the human form, to create intentionally. So we have this ability to set intention and create intentionally, and all different, and these pieces of the source have endless abilities, endlessly different creative abilities, which makes us unique, and yet a part of this one source, this source, all that is, whatever you want to call it. So that's my 2 cents on that.
I certainly agree, but all I know is what I experienced.
Yeah.
And I really don't know what you experienced, Christiana, or you experienced, Calen. I only know my own experience.
Right.
And different people seem to have different experiences, and that's all part of the mystery. So thank you ever much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I have one other thing to suggest, David. If do you know Peter Champoux and his Gaia-graphic work? Peter, Champous. I'll send you the information. It's called Gaia Graphics, and this is a combination of astrology and Earth and using Earth energy, and Gaia, Gaia, and then graphics. It's a study of geometric place relationships that illustrates how a people's purpose is manifest on the land. And he has done a YouTube video for the Sunray Peace Village in Lincoln, Vermont, that is absolutely spectacular and fascinating. And it melds these two methodologies, the earthwork and dowsing, with geometric place relationships, sacred geometry, and relationships around the world. I mean, because it has to do with lays and vortices, et cetera, et cetera. Very, very, very interesting. I encourage you to check into that, and I'll send you the information. It's called Gaia Graphics, Peter Champoux.
Well, thank you very much for that.
Sure.
And in those comments, all right, to me, every sentient human entity is itself, within itself, the rods or the pendulum, and that the rods and the pendulum are simply giving you an outward indication of the primary instrument itself, which is that what did you call it again? The point.
Genesis point.
Energy. Yep. Yes, exactly, right. And so the way I dowse is I simply walk the land. I don't use any instruments. And it just, the feeling simply occurs. It's a kind of intuitive experience.
Yeah.
Anyway, so.
Yeah, and I think
Thank you
most advanced dowsers, their bodies are a dowsing tool. I mean, and I'm sure Calen, but I would imagine when you have lots of people on the labyrinth at the same time, and you're having to be aware of the ebb and flow of energy, and whether or not, and holding space for that labyrinth to do what it is intended to do for that group, it's probably helpful to have a dowsing tool handy.
Yeah,
And that reminds me of Calen's telling the story of the baby Rinpoches.
Yeah.
And what I put in my notes is the question, is the baby Rinpoche omniscient?
Omniscient?
Yeah.
Yes.
They sure seem to be when I was talking to them.
Okay, well, yeah, but see, you can't get inside their experience.
No.
But if they
Okay,
are,
anyway.
if they are the three-dimensional reality of non-conceptual thought-free original wakefulness, then they're omniscient. I mean, there is only that. Yeah. And yes, it's a lot to chew on, and a lot to talk about, and this is all very juicy. But Calen, can you stay on for a few more minutes?
Yes.
Yep. I'm signing out. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Thanks, David. I do want to ask a couple of other questions. So in terms of, and I think David sort of touched on this, what have you found to be the biggest disconnect or misunderstanding with people using labyrinths? And what can be done to support greater awareness of labyrinths as energetic memory matrices, or what David said, what did he call them? Jump off points, or the, what was the term he used? But what can be done to promote greater awareness?
Ready for evolving to, I think he says, I wrote down, sentient human consciousness is evolving, and they arrive at a genesis point and are ready for an experience, and that's when they can have an experience on the labyrinth. I took a note on that one thing he said.
Okay.
That David said.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about the biggest disconnect or misunderstanding, because I tend not to. I mean, if we're discussing labyrinths, we're not really discussing labyrinths with people that don't know what a labyrinth is. We sort of in a community of other labyrinth facilitators or people that have walked labyrinths and know what they are. So I haven't found a lot of disconnect or misunderstanding when it's explained this is a walking meditation. You know, you step into the path and be open to the experience. So I don't know that I have a right answer for that part.
Okay.
And as opposed to supporting greater awareness of labyrinths as energetic memory matrices, that would just be part of the introduction. As you know, in addition to saying that, you know, you should open yourself to the experience, you should walk in with an open heart. You know, there's a typical presentation a lot of people give when you reach the center. You know, you've completed the walk to Jerusalem, so to speak, and you can have your experience there, and you walk out with maybe a different viewpoint of things. So if you said you're entering a energy memory matrice, you'll be able to access memories from the beginning to the end of time, and maybe look at things differently that have happened to you, or maybe see something in your future that could be different, then maybe people would approach the walk differently. I mean, I know that there's been walks focused on healing trauma. So when those person steps into the labyrinth, in theory, they are invited to go back and experience or revisit a trauma that they've had somewhere in their life, and maybe come to a better understanding of it. Mm-hmm. So that's going back to a previous memory. Mm-hmm. And maybe after you complete that labyrinth walk, is to, through the Urtas, update that memory and try to make it an experience that isn't as harmful or causing as much grief or problems going forward, that you've dealt with it in a way that you're trying to have a better understanding of it and how you can work with it and then move forward.
So I think that what I was getting at with the disconnect or misunderstanding was sort of what David was talking about when he said he's had people come out and say, "I don't know what the big deal is," and not have had what they think right then is any change or what they expected to have. And I think
what they expected to have was based on whatever the intention was set by the person facilitating the labyrinth walk and the instructions that were given.
Yeah.
So there's that portion of it. The person facilitating the labyrinth walk has a huge responsibility.
Yeah. So that's what I'm pointing to. So the more that we can really prepare the labyrinth and work with the labyrinth prior to the event and really get it primed, it was a capital P, to handle what is coming in terms of the people themselves. And sometimes you don't know. Sometimes it's an open walk and you just have people showing up because they need to walk a labyrinth that day. And you have no idea what their backgrounds are or their situation is. They're just coming because it's it's a solstice labyrinth walk or whatever it is. But you can still intentionally prime the labyrinth so that you're on the same page and people are, and you can explain, this is, and make sure that the connection is good and the database has been updated, etc., so that it is more effective for more people.
Yes. Yeah, the labyrinth needs as much preparation as the people do that are going to walk the labyrinth. I did a talk one time on my process for putting a labyrinth on the ground. I was explaining all of the geometry and the measurements and discussion with the land and finding the place where the labyrinth wanted to be and all of this and everything. And someone came up afterward and said, "Wow, I just slapped the thing on the ground. Maybe you should come out and look at it to see if I messed anything up." So they had just seen a picture of one and they just went out and slapped it on the ground.
Yeah.
In their terms, without any idea of what it was supposed to be or anything. They just liked the look of it. So that was it.
Yeah. And that in and of itself, it's like if you build it, they will come kind of thing. I mean, there is some kind of energy that has urged them or spurred them to do this. So that in and of itself isn't a negative.
No, it's not necessarily a negative thing. It was just interesting that they had, for whatever reason, they decided that they needed to do that, and they just put it on the ground.
Yeah.
So
and then they came to your event and found out, there's a lot more to it. And so this was their path. This is the way. This has been my experience with labyrinths. That sometimes this happens. It seems completely not synchronistic at all. It's totally synchronistic. And then the next thing happens because then they put this on the ground. Then they find out about you and this labyrinth event. And then it's like, oh, okay, look at what's here. There's a lot. It's really way more than I ever knew about. And then they're now on this labyrinth path with a support that they never knew existed before. So you just don't know the synchronicity, and I think that we didn't even talk about that. But this whole idea of synchronicity, I think, is inherent in this whole idea of the Rigpa state, but also the Ertos. Synchronicity is past, present, and future existing in Minkowski's space as a cone that's accessing, like a layer cake easily. And that, to me, where the synchronicity comes in, even if we are not conscious of it, because we are awakened and we have the ability to awaken as conscious beings to that we have the ability to access this. Calen, are you there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just ranting. Okay. So
I didn't know if there was a question there.
No question. But I think that whole idea of synchronicity, and this is part of that, what you were talking about. So getting back to Gaia and what's going on the planet, how do you see, and our responsibility or irresponsibility in that regard as a species. How do you see labyrinths being used to help Gaia successfully navigate these times that we're living, these transition times? And I'm saying, using that word transition as when I'm talking about the eon, the changes in the ages from the Piscean to the Aquarian age, this which is happening as we speak.
If it's new labyrinths, if new labyrinths can be put in areas, to expand the database when they're invited in, and portable labyrinths, if everyone that has portable labyrinths can just try to unroll them as much as they can and get them some space, go set up go talk to the local grocery store or something, say, I'd like to set up the labyrinth in the parking lot on Wednesday from 5 to 6 o'clock. If that works for someone's schedule, and you just set your labyrinth up in the parking lot there, and somebody's going to wander over and want to know what's going on, and the next thing you know, you could have 100 people there for the Wednesday labyrinth walk. They just need to be in use, and they need to be offering their gifts. So that's for the next 15 or 20 years. I think I think there are thousands of trained Veritas facilitators wandering around, and some of them have access to portable labyrinths. They certainly have the ability to draw one on the ground if they've taken any kind of basic workshop. And the seed pattern, you can draw a labyrinth on the ground in 15 or 20 minutes. So just use your gift and talk to someone, a local park that would have a basketball court. Can I use the basketball court on Thursdays at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? I want to put a portable labyrinth down with some tape and offer it for people to walk. And if that happens, the local television stations are going to show up, the local radio stations are going to show up, the newspaper is going to show up going, there's something going on at Howard Park last Friday, and I went to see what all the commotion was about, and all of a sudden you've opened up the labyrinth to thousands of new people. If you multiply all of the facilitators times how many times they can put a labyrinth on the ground by how many people that might show up, you could end up with thousands and thousands and thousands of new people that know what a labyrinth is and can experience it.
Well, the 100 monkey thing, it's just make it, and then it just exponentially expands.
Yeah, and the thing, it's getting all of these portable labyrinths out from where they are, and putting up temporary labyrinths and getting the word out that there was a labyrinth walk at this place at this time this week. I did my first meditation group in Dayton, Ohio, or in Concord, New Hampshire, and I sat for 11 months. I was on a Wednesday night from 7 to 8 o'clock, and I was the only person sitting there, excuse me, for 11 months. And finally, at the end of 11 months, one woman showed up because she was new to the area and had just joined the church and was so happy there was a Buddhist meditation group, and she wanted to know where everybody was that night. And I said, you're the first person that's ever showed up. And by the time I left 3 years later, we had groups meeting twice a week. And then on Sundays, the two groups met together, and there were probably 70 to 80 or 90 people. As some of the two combined. So it's just, start somewhere.
Start somewhere and be patient. Trust. Yep. Trust that it's meant to expand, and it will. Wow, Calen, thank you so much. This has been fabulous. Such a great talk. Looking forward to finding out more about what you're doing all around the globe. Where can people find out what you're next? You mentioned Chartres. How can people find out about this?
My website is we have Earth Shaman, but rainmaker.com, RAYNEMAKER.com is my website, which at some point here we'll have the calendar. Once I have things on it, Wisdom University, we have the 2 Chartres things that we're going to.
Okay, at Wisdom University, that's very famous. If you just Google Wisdom University,
Wisdom University Chartres, and the Chartres Academy should show up, and that'll also have a link then to the class in August.
Okay.
On the Black Madonna.
Okay, great.
And then if anybody wants, if they want to do any kind of talk like this, or maybe come and facilitate a labyrinth walk, or build a labyrinth or anything, I have a standing invite to put down a free labyrinth for any Unitarian Universalist church anywhere in the country. So I suppose I could just expand that to any church anywhere in the country that wants an outdoor free labyrinth on the ground. I'd be willing to do that.
And you draw it. How do you put it in?
In theory, I would drive. Sometimes people cover my expenses just to get there, and then we do what's called home hospitality. I stay with someone at the church, and then I just put the labyrinth, put the pattern down, and they usually gather people together and we have the stones ahead of time, and then we put the stones down, and you can usually get it done over a weekend.
And do you wait and to see what the land is asking for there, what type of design, or do you just douse ahead of time?
I either typically put mine down or the classical, my spiral lonk pattern. That's a quick, easy one, and it's easy to walk because it doesn't have any folding back and forth. You just, once you step on it, you're in the center, and when you leave the center, you're back out, and you don't have to go back and forth or anything. So it's easily accessible by wheelchairs and people with any kind of difficulty walking. So they don't have to go backwards and forwards on themselves. They just start and they walk one pattern to the center and they walk one pattern back out.
Okay, and so people can also get a hold of you if they have a labyrinth that hasn't been used, or if they want to know if they should put a labyrinth on their property, if they have 100 acres or something like that, and where to put it, et cetera, et cetera.
I work off of Google Earth. I can usually find spots on Google Earth, and I can do most of the work remotely.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's really been a pleasure.
It's been interesting. Thank you.
And many continued blessings on your path.
Okay. See you at TLS.
Yes. So you've been listening to the Labyrinth Society's Many Paths, Many Visions on GoToMeeting and broadcast by Spreaker with your host, Christiana Brinton. Thank you for this. Has been a little bit longer. It's today, but be sure to check the TLS website, media area, Facebook page, global group, and YouTube for a list of upcoming dates and guests. Also, if this podcast has piqued your interest in the Labyrinth Society and you'd like more information about membership, please go to www.labyrinthsociety.org/membership. Many blessings to all, and may you find what you need on your path through life.